Lecture 1. The Nature of Yoga. In this first discourse, we shall concern ourselves with the gaining of a general idea of the subject of yoga, seeking its place in nature, its own character, its object in human evolution. 1. The meaning of the universe. Let us first of all ask ourselves, looking at the world around us, what it is that the history of the world signifies. When we read history, what does the history tell us? It seems to be a moving panorama of people and events, but it is really only a dance of shadows. The people are shadows, not realities. The kings and statesmen, the ministers and armies, and the events, the battles and revolutions, the rises and falls of states are the most shadow-like dance of all. Even if the historian tries to go deeper, if he deals with economic conditions, with social organizations, with the study of the tendencies of the currents of thought, even then he is in the midst of shadows, the illusory shadows cast by unseen realities. This world is full of forms that are illusory, and the values are all wrong. The proportions are out of focus. The things which a man of the world thinks valuable, a spiritual man must cast aside as worthless. The diamonds of the world, with their glare and glitter in the rays of the outside sun, are mere fragments of broken glass to the man of knowledge. The crown of the king, the scepter of the emperor, the triumph of earthly power are less than nothing to the man who has had one glimpse of the majesty of the self. What is then real? What is truly valuable? Our answer will be very different from the answer given by the man of the world. The universe exists for the sake of the self, not for what the outer world can give, not for control over the objects of desire, not for the sake even of beauty or pleasure, does the great architect plan and build his worlds. He has filled them with objects, beautiful and pleasure-giving. The great arch of the sky above, the mountains with snow-clad peaks, the valleys soft with verdure and fragrant with blossoms, the oceans with their vast depths, their surface now calm as a lake, now tossing in fury, they all exist, not for the objects themselves, but for their value to the self. Not for themselves, because they are anything in themselves, but that the purpose of the self may be served and his manifestations made possible. The world, with all its beauty, its happiness and suffering, its joys and pains, is planned with the utmost ingenuity in order that the powers of the self may be shown forth in manifestation. From the fire mist to the logos, all exist for the sake of the self. The lowest grain of dust, the mightiest deva in his heavenly regions, the plant that grows out of sight in the nook of a mountain, the star that shines aloft over us all, these exist in order that the fragments of the one self, embodied in countless forms, may realize their own identity and manifest the powers of the self through the matter that envelopes them. There is but one self in the lowliest dust and the loftiest deva. Mamam Saha, my portion, a portion of myself, says Sri Krishna, are all these Jivatmas, all these living spirits. For them the universe exists, for them the sun shines, and the waves roll, and the winds blow, and the rain falls, that the self may know himself as manifested in matter, as embodied in the universe. 2. The unfolding of consciousness. One of those pregnant and significant ideas which Theosophy scatters so lavishly around is this, that the same scale is repeated over and over again, the same succession of events in larger or smaller cycles. If you understand one cycle, you understand the whole. The same laws by which a solar system is builded go to the building up of the system of man. The laws by which the self unfolds his powers in the universe, from the fire mist up to the logos, are the same laws of consciousness which repeat themselves in the universe of man. If you understand them in the one, you can equally understand them in the other. Grasp them in the small and the large is revealed to you. Grasp them in the large and the small becomes intelligible to you. The great unfolding from the stone to the God goes on through millions of years, through aeons of time. But the long unfolding that takes place in the universe takes place in a shorter time cycle within the limit of humanity, and this in a cycle so brief that it seems as nothing beside the longer one. Within a still briefer cycle, a similar unfolding takes place in the individual, rapidly, swiftly, with all the force of its past behind it. These forces that manifest and unveil themselves in evolution are cumulative in their power. Embodied in the stone, in the mineral world, they grow and put out a little more of strength, and in the mineral world, accomplish their unfolding. Then they become too strong for the mineral and press on into the vegetable world. There they unfold more and more of their divinity until they become too mighty for the vegetable and become animal. Expanding within and gaining experiences from the animal, they again overflow the limits of the animal and appear as the human. In the human being, they still grow and accumulate with ever increasing force and exert greater pressure against the barrier, and then out of the human, they press into the superhuman. This last process of evolution is called yoga. Coming to the individual, the man of our own globe has behind him his long evolution in other chains than ours. This same evolution through mineral to vegetable, through vegetable to animal, through animal to man, and then from our last dwelling place in the lunar orb onto this terrene globe that we call the earth. Our evolution here has all the force of the last evolution in it, and hence, when we come to this shortest cycle of evolution, which is called yoga, the man has behind him the whole of the forces accumulated in his human evolution, and it is the accumulation of these forces which enables him to make the passage so rapidly. We must connect our yoga with the evolution of consciousness everywhere, else we shall not understand it at all. For the laws of evolution of consciousness in a universe are exactly the same as the laws of yoga, and the principles whereby consciousness unfolds itself in the great evolution of humanity are the same principles that we take in yoga and deliberately apply to the more rapid unfolding of our own consciousness. So that yoga, when it is definitely begun, is not a new thing, as some people imagine. The whole evolution is one in its essence. The succession is the same, the sequence is identical. Whether you are thinking of the unfolding of consciousness in the universe, or in the human race, or in the individual, you can study the laws of the whole, and in yoga you learn to apply those same laws to your own consciousness rationally and definitely. All the laws are one, however different in their stage of manifestation. If you look at yoga in this light, then this yoga, which seemed so alien and so far off, will begin to wear a familiar face and come to you in a garb not wholly strange. As you study the unfolding of consciousness and the corresponding evolution of form, it will not seem so strange that from man you should pass on to Superman, transcending the barrier of humanity and finding yourself in the region where divinity becomes more manifest. 3. The oneness of the self. The self in you is the same as the self universal. Whatever powers are manifested throughout the world, those powers exist in germ, in latency, in you. He, the Supreme, does not evolve. In him there are no additions or subtractions. His portions, the Jivatmas, are as himself, and they only unfold their powers in matter as conditions around them draw those powers forth. If you realize the unity of the self amid the diversities of the not-self, then yoga will not seem an impossible thing to you. 4. The quickening of the process of self-unfoldment. Educated and thoughtful men and women you already are. Already you have climbed up that long ladder which separates the present outer form of the deity in you from his form in the dust. The manifest deity sleeps in the mineral and the stone. He becomes more and more unfolded in vegetables and animals, and lastly in man he has reached what appears as his culmination to ordinary men. Having done so much, shall you not do more? With the consciousness so far unfolded, does it seem impossible that it should unfold in the future into the divine? As you realize that the laws of the evolution of form and of the unfolding of consciousness in the universe and man are the same, and that it is through these laws that the yogi brings out his hidden powers, then you will understand also that it is not necessary to go into the mountain or into the desert to hide yourself in a cave or a forest in order that the union with the self may be obtained, he who is within you and without you. Sometimes, for a special purpose, seclusion may be useful. It may be well at times to retire temporarily from the busy haunts of men. But in the universe planned by Ishvara, in order that the powers of the self may be brought out, there is your best field for yoga, planned with divine wisdom and sagacity. The world is meant for the unfolding of the self. Why should you then seek to run away from it? Look at Sri Krishna himself in that great Upanishad of yoga, the Bhagavad Gita. He spoke it out on a battlefield and not on a mountain peak. He spoke it to a Kshatriya ready to fight and not to a Brahmana quietly retired from the world. The Kurukshetra of the world is the field of yoga. They who cannot face the world have not the strength to face the difficulties of yoga practice. If the outer world outwearies your powers, how do you expect to conquer the difficulties of the inner life? If you cannot climb over the little troubles of the world, how can you hope to climb over the difficulties that a yogi has to scale? Those men blunder who think that running away from the world is the road to victory and that peace can be found only in certain localities. As a matter of fact, you have practiced yoga unconsciously in the past, even before your self-consciousness had separated itself, was aware of itself. Sand knew itself to be different, in temporary matter at least, from all the others that surround it. And that is the first idea that you should take up and hold firmly. Yoga is only a quickened process of the ordinary unfolding of consciousness. Yoga may then be defined as the rational application of the laws of the unfolding of consciousness in an individual case. That is what is meant by the methods of yoga. You study the laws of the unfolding of consciousness in the universe, you then apply them to a special case, and that case is your own. You cannot apply them to another. They must be self-applied. That is the definite principle to grasp. So we must add one more word to our definition. Yoga is the rational application of the laws of the unfolding of consciousness, self-applied in an individual case. 5. Yoga is a science. Next, yoga is a science. That is the second thing to grasp. Yoga is a science and not a vague, dreamy drifting or imagining. It is an applied science, a systematized collection of laws applied to bring about a definite end. It takes up the laws of psychology applicable to the unfolding of the whole consciousness of man on every plane, in every world, and applies those rationally in a particular case. This rational application of the laws of unfolding consciousness acts exactly on the same principles that you see applied around you every day in other departments of science. You know by looking at the world around you how enormously the intelligence of man, cooperating with nature, may quicken natural processes, and the working of intelligence is as natural as anything else. We make this distinction, and practically it is a real one, between rational and natural growth, because human intelligence can guide the working of natural laws, and when we come to deal with yoga, we are in the same department of applied science as, let us say, is the scientific farmer or gardener when he applies the natural laws of selection to breeding. The farmer or gardener cannot transcend the laws of nature, nor can he work against them. He has no other laws of nature to work with save universal laws by which nature is evolving forms around us, and yet he does in a few years what nature takes perhaps hundreds of thousands of years to do. And how? By applying human intelligence to choose the laws that serve him and to neutralize the laws that hinder. He brings the divine intelligence in man to utilize the divine powers in nature that are working for general rather than for particular ends. Take the breeder of pigeons. Out of the blue rock pigeon he develops the pouter or the fantail. He chooses out, generation after generation, the forms that show most strongly the peculiarity that he wishes to develop. He mates such birds together, takes every favoring circumstance into consideration, and selects again and so on and on till the peculiarity that he wants to establish has become a well marked feature. Remove his controlling intelligence, leave the birds to themselves, and they revert to the ancestral type. Or take the case of the gardener. Out of the wild rose of the hedge has been evolved every rose of the garden. Many petaled roses are but the result of the scientific culture of the five petaled rose of the hedgerow, the wild product of nature. A gardener who chooses the pollen from one plant and places it on the carpers of another is simply doing deliberately what is done every day by the bee and the fly. But he chooses his plants, and he chooses those that have the qualities he wants intensified, and from those again he chooses those that show the desired qualities still more clearly until he has produced a flower so different from the original stock that only by tracing it back can you tell the stock whence it sprang. So is it in the application of the laws of psychology that we call yoga. Systematized knowledge of the unfolding of consciousness applied to the individualized self, that is yoga. As I have just said, it is by the world that consciousness has been unfolded, and the world is admirably planned by the Logos for this unfolding of consciousness. Hence, the would be yogi, choosing out his objects and applying his laws, finds in the world exactly the things he wants to make his practice of yoga real, a vital thing, a quickening process for the knowledge of the self. There are many laws. You can choose those which you require, you can evade those you do not require, you can utilize those you need, and thus you can bring about the result that nature, without that application of human intelligence, cannot so swiftly effect. Take it then that yoga is within your reach, with your powers, and that even some of the lower practices of yoga, some of the simpler applications of the laws of the unfolding of consciousness to yourself will benefit you in this world as well as in all others. For you are really merely quickening your growth, your unfolding, taking advantage of the powers nature puts within your hands and deliberately eliminating the conditions which would not help you in your work but rather hinder your march forward. If you see it in that light, it seems to me that yoga will be to you a far more real, practical thing than it is when you merely read some fragments about it taken from Sanskrit books and often mistranslated into English, and you will begin to feel that to be a yogi is not necessarily a thing for a life far off, an incarnation far removed from the present one. 6. Man, a duality. Some of the terms used in yoga are necessarily to be known. For yoga takes man for a special purpose and studies him for a special end, and therefore only troubles itself about two great facts regarding man, mind, and body. First, he is a unit of consciousness. That is a point to be definitely grasped. There is only one of him in each set of envelopes, and sometimes the theosophist has to revise his ideas about man when he begins this practical line. Theosophy, quite usefully and rightly, for the understanding of the human constitution, divides man into many parts and pieces. We talk of physical, astral, mental, etc. Or we talk about sthula sharira, sukshma sharira, karana sharira, and so on. Sometimes we divide man into anamaya kosha, pranamaya kosha, manomaya kosha, etc. We divide man into so many pieces in order to study him thoroughly that we can hardly find the man because of the pieces. This is, so to say, for the study of human anatomy and physiology. But yoga is practical and psychological. I'm not complaining of the various subdivisions of other systems. They are necessary for the purpose of those systems. But yoga, for its practical purposes, considers man simply as a duality, mind and body, a unit of consciousness in a set of envelopes. This is not the duality of the self and the not self, for in yoga, self includes consciousness plus such matter as it cannot distinguish from itself, and not self is only the matter it can put aside. Man is not pure self, pure consciousness, samvid. That is an abstraction. In the concrete universe, there are always the self and his sheaths, however tenuous the latter may be, so that a unit of consciousness is inseparable from matter, and a jivatma or monad is invariably consciousness plus matter. In order that this may come out clearly, two terms are used in yoga as constituting man: prana and pradhana, life breath and matter. Prana is not only the life breath of the body, but the totality of the life forces of the universe, or in other words, the life side of the universe. I am prana, says Indra. Prana here means the totality of the life forces. They are taken as consciousness, mind. Pradhana is the term used for matter. Body, or the opposite of mind, means for the yogi in practice so much of the appropriated matter of the outer world as he is able to put away from himself to distinguish from his own consciousness. This division is very significant and useful if you can catch clearly hold of the root idea. Of course, looking at the thing from beginning to end, you will see prana, the great life, the great self, always present in all, and you will see the envelopes, the bodies, the sheaths present at the different stages, taking different forms. But from the standpoint of yogic practice, that is called prana or self, with which the man identifies himself for the time, including every sheath of matter from which the man is unable to separate himself in consciousness. That unit to the yogi is the self, so that it is a changing quantity. As he drops off one sheath after another and says, "That is not myself," he is coming nearer and nearer to his highest point, to consciousness in a single film, in a single atom of matter, a monad. For all practical purposes of yoga, the man, the working, conscious man, is so much of him as he cannot separate from the matter enclosing him or with which he is connected. Only that is body which the man is able to put aside and say, "This is not I, but mine." We find we have a whole series of terms in yoga which may be repeated over and over again. All the states of mind exist on every plane, says Vyasa, and this way of dealing with man enables the same significant words, as we shall see in a moment, to be used over and over again with an ever subtler connotation. They all become relative and are equally true at each stage of evolution. Now, it is quite clear that so far as many of us are concerned, the physical body is the only thing of which we can say, "It is not myself," so that in the practice of yoga at first for you, all the words that would be used in it to describe the states of consciousness, the states of mind, would deal with the waking consciousness in the body as the lowest state, and rising up from that, all the words would be relative terms implying a distinct and recognizable state of the mind in relation to that which is the lowest. In order to know how you shall begin to apply to yourselves the various terms used to describe the states of mind, you must carefully analyze your own consciousness and find out how much of it is really consciousness and how much is matter so closely appropriated that you cannot separate it from yourself. 7. States of mind. Let us take it in detail. 4 states of consciousness are spoken of amongst us: waking consciousness or Jagrat, the dream consciousness or Swapna, the deep sleep consciousness or Sushupti, and the state beyond that called Turiya. Beginning of footnote number 3. It is impossible to avoid the use of these technical terms even in an introduction to yoga. There are no exact English equivalents, and they are no more troublesome to learn than any other technical psychological terms. End of footnote number 3. How are those related to the body? Jagrat is the ordinary waking consciousness that you and I are using at the present time. If our consciousness works in the subtle or astral body and is able to impress its experiences upon the brain, it is called swapna, or in English, dream consciousness. It is more vivid and real than the Jagrat state. When working in the subtler form, the mental body, it is not able to impress its experiences on the brain. It is called Sushupti or deep sleep consciousness. Then the mind is working on its own contents, not on outer objects. But if it has so far separated itself from connection with the brain that it cannot be readily recalled by outer means, then it is called Turiya, a lofty state of trance. These four states, when correlated to the four planes, represent a much unfolded consciousness. Jagrat is related to the physical, Swapna to the astral, Sushupti to the mental, and Turiya to the buddhic. When passing from one world to another, we should use these words to designate the consciousness working under the conditions of each world. But the same words are repeated in the books of yoga with a different context. There the difficulty occurs if we have not learned their relative nature. Swapna is not the same for all, nor is Sushupti the same for everyone. Above all, the word Samadhi, to be explained in a moment, is used in different ways and in different senses. How then are we to find our way in this apparent tangle? By knowing the state which is the starting point, and then the sequence will always be the same. All of you are familiar with the waking consciousness in the physical body. You can find four states even in that if you analyze it, and a similar sequence of the states of the mind is found on every plane. How to distinguish them then? Let us take the waking consciousness and try to see the four states in that. Suppose I take up a book and read it. I read the words. My eyes are related to the outer physical consciousness. That is the Jagrat state. I go behind the words to the meaning of the words. I have passed from the waking state of the physical plane into the Swapna state of waking consciousness that sees through the outer form, seeking the inner life. I pass from this to the mind of the writer. Here the mind touches the mind. It is the waking consciousness in its Sushupti state. If I pass from this contact and enter the very mind of the writer and live in that man's mind, then I have reached the Turiya state of the waking consciousness. Take another illustration. I look at any watch, I am in Jagrat. I close my eyes and make an image of the watch, I am in Swapna. I call together many ideas of many watches and reach the ideal watch, I am in Sushupti. I pass to the ideal of time in the abstract, I am in Turiya. But all these are stages in the physical plane consciousness. I have not left the body. In this way, you can make states of mind intelligible and real instead of mere words. 8. Samadhi. Some other important words which recur from time to time in the Yoga Sutras need to be understood, though there are no exact English equivalents. As they must be used to avoid clumsy circumlocutions, it is necessary to explain them. It is said yoga is samadhi. Samadhi is a state in which the consciousness is so dissociated from the body that the latter remains insensible. It is a state of trance in which the mind is fully self-conscious, though the body is insensitive, and from which the mind returns to the body with the experiences it has had in the superphysical state, remembering them when again immersed in the physical brain. Samadhi for any one person is relative to his waking consciousness, but implies insensitiveness of the body. If an ordinary person throws himself into trance and is active on the astral plane, his samadhi is on the astral. If his consciousness is functioning in the mental plane, samadhi is there. The man who can so withdraw from the body as to leave it insensitive, while his mind is fully self-conscious, can practice samadhi. The phrase yoga is samadhi covers facts of the highest significance and greatest instruction. Suppose you are only able to reach the astral world when you are asleep. Your consciousness there is, as we have seen, in the Swapna state. But as you slowly unfold your powers, the astral forms begin to intrude upon your waking physical consciousness until they appear as distinctly as do physical forms, and thus become objects of your waking consciousness. The astral world, then, for you, no longer belongs to the Swapna consciousness, but to the Jagrat. You have taken two worlds within the scope of your Jagrat consciousness, the physical and the astral worlds, and the mental world is in your Swapna consciousness. Your body is then the physical and the astral bodies taken together. As you go on, the mental plane begins similarly to intrude itself, and the physical, astral, and mental all come within your waking consciousness. All these are then your Jagrat world. These three worlds form but one world to you. They're three corresponding bodies, but one body that perceives and acts. The three bodies of the ordinary man have become one body for the yogi. If under these conditions you want to see only one world at a time, you must fix your attention on it and thus focus it. You can, in that state of enlarged waking, concentrate your attention on the physical and see it. Then the astral and mental will appear hazy. So you can focus your attention on the astral and see it. Then the physical and the mental, being out of focus, will appear dim. You will easily understand this if you remember that in this hall, I may focus my sight in the middle of the hall when the pillars on both sides will appear indistinctly. Or I may concentrate my attention on a pillar and see it distinctly, but I then see you only vaguely at the same time. It is a change of focus, not a change of body. Remember that all which you can put aside as not yourself is the body of the yogi, and hence, as you go higher, the lower bodies form but a single body, and the consciousness in that sheath of matter, which it still cannot throw away, that becomes the man. Yoga is Samadhi. It is the power to withdraw from all that you know as body and to concentrate yourself within. That is Samadhi. No ordinary means will then call you back to the world that you have left. Beginning of footnote number 4. An Indian yogi in Samadhi, discovered in a forest by some ignorant and brutal Englishmen, was so violently ill-used that he returned to his tortured body, only to leave it again at once by death. End of footnote number 4. This will also explain to you the phrase in the secret doctrine that the adept begins his Samadhi on the Atmic plane. When a Jivan Mukta enters into Samadhi, he begins it on the Atmic plane. All planes below the Atmic are one plane for him. He begins his Samadhi on a plane to which the mere man cannot rise. He begins it on the Atmic plane and thence rises stage by stage to the higher cosmic planes. The same word, Samadhi, is used to describe the states of the consciousness, whether it rises above the physical into the astral, as in self-induced trance of an ordinary man, or as in the case of a Jivan Mukta when, the consciousness being already centered in the fifth or Atmic plane, it rises to the higher planes of a larger world. 9. The literature of yoga. Unfortunately for non-Sanskrit knowing people, the literature of yoga is not largely available in English. The general teachings of yoga are to be found in the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. Those, in many translations, are within your reach, but they are general, not special. They give you the main principles, but do not tell you about the methods in any detailed way. Even in the Bhagavad Gita, while you are told to make sacrifices to become indifferent and so on, it is all of the nature of moral precept, absolutely necessary indeed, but still not telling you how to reach the conditions put before you. The special literature of yoga is, first of all, many of the minor Upanishads, the 108 as they are called. Then comes the enormous mass of literature called the Tantras. These books have an evil significance in the ordinary English ear, but not quite rightly. The Tantras are very useful books, very valuable and instructive. All occult science is to be found in them, but they are divisible into three classes: those that deal with white magic, those that deal with black magic, and those that deal with what we may call grey magic, a mixture of the two. Now, magic is the word which covers the methods of deliberately bringing about supernormal physical states by the action of the will. A high tension of the nerves, brought on by anxiety or disease, leads to ordinary hysteria, emotional and foolish. A similarly high tension brought about by the will renders a man sensitive to superphysical vibrations, going to sleep has no significance. But going into Samadhi is a priceless power. The process is largely the same, but one is due to ordinary conditions, the other to the action of the trained will. The yogi is the man who has learned the power of the will and knows how to use it to bring about foreseen and foredetermined results. This knowledge has ever been called magic. It is the name of the great science of the past, the one science to which only the word great was given in the past. The tantras contain the whole of that. The occult side of man and nature, the means whereby discoveries may be made, the principles whereby the man may recreate himself, all these are in the tantras. The difficulty is that without a teacher they are very dangerous. And again, a man trying to practice the tantric methods without a teacher makes himself very ill. So the tantras have got a bad name both in the West and here in India. A good many of the American occult books now sold are scraps of the tantras which have been translated. One difficulty is that these tantric works often use the name of a bodily organ to represent an astral or mental center. There is some reason in that because all the centers are connected with each other from body to body. But no reliable teacher would set his pupil to work on the bodily organs until he had some control over the higher centers and had carefully purified the physical body. Knowing the one helps you to know the other, and the teacher who has been through it all can place his pupil on the right path. But if you take up these words, which are all physical, and do not know to what the physical word is applied, then you will only become very confused and may injure yourself. For instance, in one of the sutras it is said that if you meditate on a certain part of the tongue, you will obtain astral sight. That means that if you meditate on the pituitary body, just over this part of the tongue, astral sight will be opened. The particular word used to refer to a center has a correspondence in the physical body, and the word is often applied to the physical organs when the other is meant. This is what is called a blind, and it is intended to keep the people away from dangerous practices in the books that are published. People may meditate on that part of their tongues all their lives without anything coming of it, but if they think upon the corresponding center in the body, a good deal, much harm, may come of it. Meditate on the navel, it is also said. This means the solar plexus, for there is a close connection between the two. But to meditate on that is to incur the danger of a serious nervous disorder, almost impossible to cure. All who know how many people in India suffer through these practices, ill understood, recognize that it is not wise to plunge into them without someone to tell you what they mean, and what may be safely practiced and what not. The other part of the yoga literature is a small book called The Sutras of Patanjali. That is available, but I am afraid that few are able to make much of it by themselves. In the first place, to elucidate the sutras, which are simply headings, there is a great deal of commentary in Sanskrit, only partially translated. And even the commentaries have this peculiarity that all the most difficult words are merely repeated, not explained, so that the student is not much enlightened. 10. Some definitions. There are a few words constantly recurring which need brief definitions in order to avoid confusion. They are unfolding, evolution, spirituality, psychism, yoga, and mysticism. Unfolding always refers to consciousness, evolution to forms. Evolution is the homogeneous becoming the heterogeneous, the simple becoming complex. But there is no growth and no perfectioning for spirit, for consciousness. It is all there and always, and all that can happen to it is to turn itself outwards instead of remaining turned inwards. The God in you cannot evolve, but he may show forth his powers through matter that he has appropriated for the purpose, and the matter evolves to serve him. He himself only manifests what he is. And on that, many a saying of the great mystics may come to your mind. Become, says Saint Ambrose, what you are, a paradoxical phrase. but one that sums up a great truth. Become in outer manifestation that which you are in inner reality. That is the object of the whole process of yoga. Spirituality is the realization of the One. Psychism is the manifestation of intelligence through any material vehicle. Beginning of footnote number 5. See London Lectures of 1907, Spirituality and Psychism. End of footnote number 5. Yoga is the seeking of union by the intellect, a science. Mysticism is the seeking of the same union by emotion. Beginning of footnote number 6. The word yoga may, of course, be rightly used of all union with the self, whatever the road taken. I am using it here in the narrower sense as peculiarly connected with the intelligence, as a science, herein following Patanjali. End of footnote number 6. See the mystic. He fixes his mind on the object of devotion. He loses self-consciousness and passes into a rapture of love and adoration, leaving all external ideas wrapped in the object of his love, and a great surge of emotion sweeps him up to God. He does not know how he has reached that lofty state. He is conscious only of God and his love for him. Here is the rapture of the mystic, the triumph of the saint. The yogi does not work like that. Step after step, he realizes what he is doing. He works by science and not by emotion, so that any who do not care for science, finding it dull and dry, are not at present unfolding that part of their nature which will find its best help in the practice of yoga. The yogi may use devotion as a means. This comes out very plainly in Patanjali. He has given many means whereby yoga may be followed, and curiously, devotion to Ishvara is one of several means. There comes out the spirit of the scientific thinker. Devotion to Ishvara is not for him an end in itself, but means to an end, the concentration of the mind. You see there at once the difference of spirit. Devotion to Ishvara is the path of the mystic. He attains communion by that. Devotion to Ishvara as a means of concentrating the mind is the scientific way in which the yogi regards devotion. No number of words would have brought out the difference of spirit between yoga and mysticism as well as this. The one looks upon devotion to Ishvara as a way of reaching the beloved. The other looks upon it as a means of reaching concentration. To the mystic, God in himself is the object of search. Delight in him is the reason for approaching him. Union with him in consciousness is his goal, but to the yogi, fixing the attention on God is merely an effective way of concentrating the mind. In the one, devotion is used to obtain an end. In the other, God is seen as the end and is reached directly by rapture. 11. God without and God within. That leads us to the next point, the relation of God without to God within. To the yogi, who is the very type of Hindu thought, there is no definite proof of God save the witness of the self within to his existence. And his idea of finding the proof of God is that you should strip away from your consciousness all limitations, and thus reach the stage where you have pure consciousness, save a veil of the thin nirvanic matter. Then you know that God is. So you read in the Upanishad, whose only proof is the witness of the self. This is very different from Western methods of thought, which try to demonstrate God by a process of argument. The Hindu will tell you that you cannot demonstrate God by any argument or reasoning. He is above and beyond reasoning, and although the reason may guide you on the way, it will not prove to demonstration that God is. The only way you can know Him is by diving into yourself. There you will find Him, and know that He is without as well as within you. And yoga is a system that enables you to get rid of everything from consciousness that is not God, save that one veil of the nirvanic atom, and so to know that God is, with an unshakable certainty of conviction. To the Hindu, that inner conviction is the only thing worthy to be called faith, and this gives you the reason why faith is said to be beyond reason, and so is often confused with credulity. Faith is beyond reason because it is the testimony of the self to himself. That conviction of existence as self, of which reason is only one of the outer manifestations, and the only true faith is that inner conviction which no argument can either strengthen or weaken, of the innermost self of you, that of which alone you are entirely sure. It is the aim of yoga to enable you to reach that self constantly, not by a sudden glimpse of intuition, but steadily, unshakably, and unchangeably. And when that self is reached, then the question, is there a God, can never again come into the human mind. 12. Changes of consciousness and vibrations of matter. It is necessary to understand something about that consciousness which is yourself and about the matter which is the envelope of consciousness, but which the self so often identifies with himself. The great characteristic of consciousness is change, with the foundation of certainty that it is. The consciousness of existence never changes, but beyond this all is change, and only by the changes does consciousness become self-consciousness. Consciousness is an ever-changing thing, circling round one idea that never changes, self-existence. The consciousness itself is not changed by any change of position or place. It only changes its states within itself. In matter, every change of state is brought about by change of place. A change of consciousness is a change of a state. A change of matter is a change of place. Moreover, every change of state in consciousness is related to vibrations of matter in its vehicle. When matter is examined, we find three fundamental qualities: rhythm, mobility, stability. Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. Sattva is rhythm, vibration. It is more than Rajas or mobility. It is a regulated movement, a swinging from one side to the other over a definite distance, a length of wave, a vibration. The question is often put, how can things in such different categories as matter and spirit affect each other? Can we bridge that great gulf which some say can never be crossed? Yes, the Indian has crossed it, or rather has shown that there is no gulf. To the Indian, matter and spirit are not only the two phases of the one, but by a subtle analysis of the relation between consciousness and matter, he sees that in every universe the logos imposes upon matter a certain definite relation of rhythms, every vibration of matter corresponding to a change in consciousness. There is no change in consciousness, however subtle, that has not appropriated to it a vibration in matter. There is no vibration in matter, however swift or delicate, which has not correlated to it a certain change in consciousness. That is the first great work of the Logos, which the Hindu scriptures trace out in the building of the atom, the Tanmatra, the measure of that, the measure of consciousness. He who is consciousness imposes on his material the answer to every change in consciousness, and that is an infinite number of vibrations. So that between the self and his sheaths, there is this invariable relation, the change in consciousness and the vibration of matter, and vice versa. That makes it possible for the self to know the not-self. These correspondences are utilized in Raja Yoga and Hatha Yoga, the kingly yoga, and the yoga of resolve. The Raja Yoga seeks to control the changes in consciousness, and by this control to rule the material vehicles. The Hatha Yoga seeks to control the vibrations of matter, and by this control to evoke the desired changes in consciousness. The weak point in Hatha Yoga is that action on this line cannot reach beyond the astral plane, and the great strain imposed on the comparatively intractable matter of the physical plane sometimes leads to atrophy of the very organs, the activity of which is necessary for effecting the changes in consciousness that would be useful. The Hatha Yogi gains control over the bodily organs with which the waking consciousness no longer concerns itself, having relinquished them to its lower part, the subconsciousness. This is often useful as regards the prevention of disease, but serves no higher purpose. When he begins to work on the brain centers connected with ordinary consciousness, and still more when he touches those connected with the superconsciousness, he enters a dangerous region and is more likely to paralyze than to evolve. That relation alone it is which makes matter cognizable. The change in the thinker is answered by a change outside, and his answer to it and the change in it that he makes by his answer rearrange again the matter of the body, which is his envelope. Hence, the rhythmic changes in matter are rightly called its cognizability. Matter may be known by consciousness because of this unchanging relation between the two sides of the manifest logos, who is one, and the self becomes aware of changes within himself and thus of those of the external worlds to which those changes are related. 13. Mind. What is mind? From the yogic standpoint, it is simply the individualized consciousness, the whole of it, the whole of your consciousness, including your activities, which the Western psychologist puts outside mind. Only on the basis of Eastern psychology is yoga possible. How shall we describe this individualized consciousness? First, it is aware of things. Becoming aware of them, it desires them. Desiring them, it tries to attain them. So we have the three aspects of consciousness: intelligence, desire, activity. On the physical plane, activity predominates, although desire and thought are present. On the astral plane, desire predominates, and thought and activity are subject to desire. On the mental plane, intelligence is the dominant note. Desire and activity are subject to it. Go to the Buddhic plane and cognition, as pure reason, predominates, and so on. Each quality is present all the time, but one predominates. So with the matter that belongs to them. In your combinations of matter, you get rhythmic, active, or stable ones. And according to the combinations of matter in your bodies will be the conditions of the activity of the whole of these in consciousness. To practice yoga, you must build your bodies of the rhythmic combinations with activity and inertia less apparent. The yogi wants to make his body match his mind. 14. Stages of mind. The mind has 5 stages, Patanjali tells us. And Vyasa comments that these stages of mind are on every plane. The first stage is the stage in which the mind is flung about, the Kshipta stage. It is the butterfly mind, the early stage of humanity, or in man, the mind of the child, darting constantly from one object to another. It corresponds to activity on the physical plane. The next is the confused stage, Mudha, equivalent to the stage of the youth, swayed by emotions, bewildered by them. He begins to feel he is ignorant, a state beyond the fickleness of the child, a characteristic state corresponding to activity in the astral world. Then comes the state of preoccupation or infatuation, Vikshipta, the state of the man possessed by an idea, love, ambition, or what not. He is no longer a confused youth, but a man with a clear aim, and an idea possesses him. It may be either the fixed idea of the madman or the fixed idea which makes the hero or the saint. But in any case, he is possessed by the idea. The quality of the idea, its truth or falsehood, makes the difference between the maniac and the martyr. Maniac or martyr, he is under the spell of a fixed idea. No reasoning avails against it. If he has assured himself that he is made of glass, no amount of argument will convince him to the contrary. He will always regard himself as being as brittle as glass. That is a fixed idea which is false, but there is a fixed idea which makes the hero and the martyr. For some great truth dearer than life is everything thrown aside. He is possessed by it, dominated by it, and he goes to death gladly for it. That state is said to be approaching yoga, for such a man is becoming concentrated, even if only possessed by one idea. This stage corresponds to activity on the lower mental plane, where the man possesses the idea instead of being possessed by it. That one-pointed state of the mind, called ekagrata in Sanskrit, is the 4th stage. He is a mature man, ready for the true life. When the man has gone through life dominated by one idea, then he is approaching yoga. He is getting rid of the grip of the world and is beyond its allurements. But when he possesses that which before possessed him, then he has become fit for yoga and begins the training which makes his progress rapid. This stage corresponds to activity on the higher mental plane. Out of this fourth stage or ekagrata arises the fifth stage, niruddha or self-controlled, when the man not only possesses one idea, but rising above all ideas, chooses as he wills, takes or does not take according to the illumined will, then he is self controlled and can effectively practice yoga. This stage corresponds to activity on the Buddhic plane. In the third stage, Vikshipta, where he is possessed by the idea, he is learning Viveka or discrimination between the outer and the inner, the real and the unreal. When he has learned the lesson of Viveka, then he advances a stage forward. And in Ekagrata, he chooses one idea, the inner life. And as he fixes his mind on that idea, he learns Vairagya or dispassion. He rises above the desire to possess objects of enjoyment belonging either to this or any other world. Then he advances towards the fifth stage, self controlled. In order to reach that, he must practice the six endowments, the Shat Sampati. These six endowments have to do with the will aspect of consciousness, as the other two, Viveka and Vairagya, have to do with the cognition and activity aspects of it. By a study of your own mind, you can find out how far you are ready to begin the definite practice of yoga. Examine your mind in order to recognize these stages in yourself. If you are in either of the two early stages, you are not ready for yoga. The child and the youth are not ready to become yogis, nor is the preoccupied man. But if you find yourself possessed by a single thought, you are nearly ready for yoga. It leads to the next stage of one-pointedness, where you can choose your idea and cling to it of your own will. Short is the step from that to the complete control which can inhibit all motions of the mind. Having reached that stage, it is comparatively easy to pass into Samadhi. 15. Inward and outward turned consciousness. Samadhi is of two kinds, one turned outward, one turned inward. The outward turned consciousness is always first. You are in the stage of Samadhi belonging to the outward turned waking consciousness, when you can pass beyond the objects to the principles which those objects manifest, when through the form you catch a glimpse of the life. Darwin was in this stage when he glimpsed the truth of evolution. That is the outward turned Samadhi of the physical body. This is technically the Samprajñata Samadhi, the Samadhi with consciousness. But to be better regarded, I think, as with consciousness outward turned, that is, conscious of objects. When the object disappears, that is, when consciousness draws itself away from the sheath by which those objects are seen, then comes the Asamprajñata Samadhi, called the Samadhi without consciousness. I prefer to call it the inward turned consciousness, as it is by turning away from the outer that this stage is reached. These two stages of Samadhi follow each other on every plane. The intense concentration on objects in the first stage and the piercing thereby through the outer form to the underlying principle are followed by the turning away of the consciousness from the sheath which has served its purpose and its withdrawal into itself, that is, into a sheath not yet recognized as a sheath. It is then for a while conscious only of itself and not of the outer world. Then comes the cloud, the dawning sense again of an outer, a dim sensing of something other than itself, that again is followed by the functioning of the nigher sheath and the recognition of the objects of the next higher plane corresponding to that sheath. Hence the complete cycle is Samprajñata Samadhi, Asamprajñata Samadhi, Megha, cloud, and then the Samprajñata Samadhi of the next plane, and so on. 16. The cloud. This term in full, Dharma Megha, cloud of righteousness or of religion, is one which is very scantily explained by the commentators. In fact, the only explanation they give is that all the man's past karma of good gathers over him and pours down upon him a rain of blessing. Let us see if we cannot find something more than this meager interpretation. The term cloud is very often used in mystic literature of the West. The cloud on the mount, the cloud on the sanctuary, the cloud on the mercy seat are expressions familiar to the student, and the experience which they indicate is familiar to all mystics in its lower phases and to some in its fullness. In its lower phases, it is the experience just noted, where the withdrawal of the consciousness into a sheath not yet recognized as a sheath is followed by the beginning of the functioning of that sheath, the first indication of which is the dim sensing of an outer. You feel as though surrounded by a dense mist, conscious that you are not alone but unable to see. Be still, be patient, wait. Let your consciousness be in the attitude of suspense. Presently the cloud will thin, and first in glimpses, then in its full beauty, the vision of a higher plane will dawn on your entranced sight. This entrance into a higher plane will repeat itself again and again until your consciousness centered on the Buddhic plane and its splendors having disappeared as your consciousness withdraws even from that exquisite sheath. You find yourself in the true cloud, the cloud on the sanctuary, the cloud that veils the holiest, that hides the vision of the self. Then comes what seems to be the draining away of the very life, the letting go of the last hold on the tangible, the hanging in a void, the horror of great darkness, loneliness unspeakable. Endure, endure. Everything must go. Nothing out of the eternal can help you. God only shines out in the stillness, as says the Hebrew. Be still and know that I am God. In that silence a voice shall be heard, the voice of the self. In that stillness a life shall be felt, the life of the self. In that void a fullness shall be revealed, the fullness of the self. In that darkness a light shall be seen, the glory of the self. The cloud shall vanish, and the shining of the self shall be made manifest. That which was a glimpse of a far-off majesty shall become a perpetual realization, and knowing the self and your unity with it, you shall enter into the peace that belongs to the self alone.